Hey everyone, welcome into Patterns Tell Stories. I'm your host Klaus, and today we're going to be talking about the new Tom DeLonge movie, Monsters of California, the poltergeist phenomenon, and hive minds in non-human intelligences. With me today, as always, is my co-host Garrett. What's up, man?
Yo, man, how's it going?
Good. Excited to get into this. There's something I wanted to talk about right off the bat, just in regards to the podcast. I know in the intros, I usually say three things that we're planning to talk about. And a lot of the time, it's we don't get to actually maybe two of them. So I just thought I'd just continue doing that as a sort of bit going forward. Just so you guys know what we're planning to talk about. And then when shit goes off the rails, you guys can tell. And then hopefully we'll talk about it the next week, but probably not. Anyway, I just thought that was kind of funny. Someone on Twitter said, hey, just make it a bit. Even though I'm like, yeah, maybe people won't think they clicked on the right episode or something. But yeah, I don't know. I'm just going to embrace it and just kind of enjoy that we can go off topic and still have a good conversation. But today we're definitely talking about Monsters of California. I watched it last night. Garrett hasn't seen it. So we're going to try to go through this without giving away any spoilers. I'm just going to read some of the stuff from like the meat of what Tom is trying to say through this movie. You know, it's nothing exactly new. There's not really any, new information he's putting out there with this movie. It's all pretty much what he's been saying for a while. Tom just put it in a package that could be more suitable for, the younger generation, which is kind of what he's tried to do with TTSA the whole time. Yeah, I'm just going to, I guess, read the main kind of monologue that the guy goes through. Garrett, I don't know if you wanted to say anything about the movie or your expectations or, in general.
Well, he had a hell of a trailer. I'll tell you that much. So I really don't know what to expect. I don't know how much of like a family movie this is going to be. I don't know how like into the weeds Tom is going to get about the quote unquote others, and like, is he going to show one? Is he going to like, I don't know. I'm just real interested because I feel like it's something that like a lot of the things Tom does, it's the first time like Angels and Airwaves. I'll be honest, bro. A lot of their songs I really like. I was like, all right. And then like after learning a lot about Tom, I was like more interested after. You know what I mean? And this is like how I kind of see this movie going is like, I don't know if it'll be my favorite movie, but like, I think that it'll be something that is going to have a lot of information. And that's like the big thing I took out of TTSA was that like, they want to make fictional and nonfiction books in order to tell these stories, So like, regardless of what I think of the movie, I think it's still going to have a lot of valuable information. And I know Tom loves it a lot and really put a lot of work into it. So, I'm just looking forward to it. But I'm curious to hear what you say about it.
Yeah, I guess I'll just get into it and then we can kind of go over what some of this means. It's kind of a lot. It's really only 2 paragraphs, but there's a lot of stuff into it. But here we go. This is one of the main characters who is basically working for a program and trying to explain the basis of the UFO phenomenon. This is what he said. Well, for centuries, man has told the story of God, how God created the universe. The universe was a well-ordered place with man at the center. But then man began to ponder, thinking about a spiritual world, a world you can't see, but filled with angels and demons. A story told within all religions combined. Then came the 1940s and things began to merge. We discovered a new life form, not human, not spirit, but very, very advanced. We didn't know whether they were good or evil, primarily because they wouldn't talk to us, at least not directly. But lately they've been showing themselves more frequently. I think your father saw them up close and personal on the night that he disappeared. You ever wonder why the world is such a mess? Why one part of the world is democratic, believes in free will, and the other part authoritarian, a loss of individuality? It's competing races and the influence they have on mankind. So from the depths of the oceans to the far reaches of any mountain range, or hell, up to the dark side of the moon, they've always been there. And throughout millennia, they would pop up every couple hundred years, and they would teach us something important about mathematics or language or science. but we hear these voices in our head. We get these ideas and epiphany. You see, they have been teaching us and advancing us. End quote. So yeah, that's a fun one, and kind of the main message, I guess, of this film. And like I said, it's nothing new that Tom hasn't said before. It's just kind of all put together in a package that you can give kids, I guess. It's fucking terrifying in a way, but yeah, man, what do you think? Your first time hearing it?
I hate to always do this, but like I always tie it back to Keel because he's the author I've read about this subject so much. That's exactly the way Keel describes it, or like mankind's relationship with this NHI seems like it's periodic or episodic is the way I've heard it described. Like you hear the term flaps, I'm sure. Keel makes it very clear that he thinks, like we talked about that in a previous episode, that he thinks that there's some sort of like proxy war going on. Part of it is like he would talk about the Middle Ages, and he'd be like, well, in the Middle Ages, like mankind really faced a lot of adversity. And he was alluding to, and he not alluding to, he was just straight up saying that like in the Middle Ages, there was like the Black Plague, and like a bunch of people in Europe were fucking dying. And according to Keel, in like the 13th, 14th century literature, he says that it's filled with people remarking on how there's UFOs in the sky, or what the people of the time would, balls of light, atmospheric phenomena, like things along those lines. It made it seem like every time humankind was in danger or really, really facing a lot of adversity, that there was always an instance where there would be some sort of change. And the thing he said that got us out of the dark ages was revolutionaries like Joan of Arc, who was a female French woman who was hearing voices in her head. And then you have people like Christopher Columbus exploring the world. Leonardo da Vinci was alive in the 1400s. And then there was another one. I think the printing press was the other thing that was invented at that time. All in this like pocket of 100 years, mankind went from having a lot of adversity to like getting through it and getting a little bit of a boost. So I don't know if I don't know. I would have to pick that apart. And like a lot of these things, I have to listen to them a lot. But that's my first impression, just hearing what you said right off the cuff. What do you think when you hear that?
Did you read the book Gods of Eden?
Yeah. Gods of Eden is one of, in my opinion, that's like a top 5 book. And it's one of the ones DeLonge recommended.
Yeah, I'm trying to find it, but in that book, he basically puts reports in about the Black Plague, about how they saw these objects in the sky, and they like sprayed this mist kind of right before the Black Plague. And it was like really fucking freaked me out. I don't know, man. That was a weird one. I don't know if you remember that, but that kind of stuck in the back of my head for a long time. So, but the one thing about this specifically was when he said, then came the 1940s and like things began to merge. Really wondering what he means by merge, like kind of the two worlds like crossing over in a way, or I mean, if they've been there this whole time and started just kind of showing up since the 1940s, I wonder if, that had to do with our nuclear weapons and stuff like that, where they started getting freaked out, or the nukes might have opened up some sort of layer in the veil, made it more thin.
Well, when you say something's merging, I don't know about you, but the first thing that pops into my head is concepts like Joseph Farrell's book, Transhumanism. And I feel like if you say emerging, that implies some sort of singularity to a degree, like one thing merging into another.
So something that I talked about last week on the podcast was when we were going over the Department of Energy documents where these UAP were making incursions into our nuclear facilities. I was wondering why they might have these flashing fucking lights going on all the time. If they were adversaries trying to gain information from us, they wouldn't be doing that. They wouldn't make themselves noticeable. This is the interesting part of this monologue, was when he was talking about how they didn't know if these others were good or evil. And the main reason they didn't know that is because they weren't talking to us, at least not directly. That sentence itself reminds me of Lou Elizondo a while ago. I think it was Dan Zetterstrom from that UFO podcast was interviewing. She was a whale expert who studied kind of whale communication and just marine communication. And Lou Elizondo submitted a question to Dan asking her, about nonverbal communication and how that might play a part, I guess, in the, communicating with whales if we were ever to do that. And I just find that to be very interesting, that there is probably some sort of nonverbal communication going on with whatever this NHI is, whether or not it's direct. It's they might be showing us something like, and I think Lou talks about it as well. If our jets and go into someone else's airspace, violate that, and then we buzz them or something like that, that's communicating. That is a form of nonverbal communication. Or if your dog basically or stares at you like my dog does all the fucking time, she'll just sit there, fucking stare at me, and it's like, okay, she needs to go out. I wonder how much of that has happened over millennia between the NHI that apparently live alongside us and humanity. Because one of Gary Nolan's my favorite tweets of his is where he says, you don't have to genetically intervene to guide our species in one direction or another. You just have to show up.
I know that you and I are familiar with the C.B. Scott Jones guy who did the studies on dolphins. I think John Alexander was in some capacity involved with this. People in different scientific groups have been very interested in communicating and animals communicating with each other for a long time, and that's pretty established. But one guy that we're familiar with is that John Alexander guy, and he absolutely was interested. This is one of the areas of his interest, was like communication, namely with dolphins.
Yeah, and it's funny. I saw he did a recent speech with George Knapp, I guess in Vail or some shit. And
oh yeah, it was great.
Yeah, it was really good. And then like one of the first slides he puts up is like, all these things are connected. And it's like shamans, remote viewing, near-death experiences, fucking UFOs. And then there's just a fucking picture of a dolphin jumping in the air. It's like, what are you talking about, dude? It's like, it's pretty funny.
Dude,
and I kind of, I got it too. Cause like, it kind of makes sense to me. I personally, when I was, I guess in my 20s, early 20s, I was in college still. I think I might have been between like high school and college. I went on a trip to Maui in Hawaii, and we did this snorkeling expedition. Me and my family. It was like my aunt, my grandma, and my cousin. And so we went. It was a bunch of families on this boat, and each family kind of went off and swam in different parts and of off the shore there. We were just kind of off doing our own thing, and then this fucking pod of dolphins, like wild dolphins, swam up to us and started like circling around us, and they seemed very playful. I was kind of freaking the fuck out because like not in my environment. I'm in the ocean. It's like these things could fuck me up easily, but they just kind of just swirled around us a little. Then I made eye contact with a few of them, and it was one of the craziest things I've ever experienced in my life. There's definitely like a sentience there. When you look into the eyes of these things, it's almost in a human type way. It's really hard to explain, but yeah, it was wild. And they just fucked around, swam around, and then just took off. For about 5 minutes they were there doing that, and it was pretty cool. So when John Alexander has that sitting up there with fucking remote viewing, and there's a sentience there that I think can tie in with all that stuff. So yeah, I just wanted to share that story. It was cool.
That is cool, dude. I love when animals, like some animals, like dolphins especially, they seem to have a sense of humor.
Totally,
Like
dude.
and they play. Like
I know.
I know a lot of animals play, but like dolphins are something else when you really watch them with each other, because they seem like they're like wisecracking each other. Dude, the other one that I wanted to tell you about as far as animals go was that army doctor we talked about, Andrea Puharich. One of the things that made him interested in parapsychology was I was reading a speech he gave in the 80s, and he tells the story of that he was a mail carrier. I think he says he was a mail carrier. I have to check, but he says he was a mail carrier, and that he constantly was getting mauled by this dog that was always on his route.
Yeah.
And he said that one day he tried to like telepathically calm the dog down, and he said he never bit him again. And he was like hooked on learning about uh uh like psychic powers and psychic abilities just off of that little interaction. That could just be a story, but like it made me smile.
It is kind of crazy where you have these, nonverbal relationships with these non-human. They are intelligences because they, are obviously interacting with you. They might not be advanced, but I think it could be very similar to our interactions with these non-human advanced intelligence behind these UFOs. It could be similar to us and how we communicate with dogs.
The other part of like when we're talking about dogs is that was another thing that Elizondo talked about. I guess it was it was probably one of those more somber quotes, if you know what I'm saying.
Yeah.
It seemed like it was one of those "we are property" quotes, I think.
Yeah.
That's so sketchy.
Fortean, yeah.
Dude, I have a sick Charles Fort quote that I wanted to read you.
Go for it.
About property. Okay, here we go. This is from John Keel's Disneyland of the Gods. He says, Charles Fort recognized the subtle warp and woof of human history when he stated, I think we are property. Someone owns this earth. All others warned off. The gods were at one time very real, and their directives to mankind were not initiated out of concern for the human condition, but calculated to protect the earth itself. Man was caught up as a pawn in some dark and forbidding celestial chess game. Events that seemed totally senseless to one generation would suddenly acquire important meaning several generations later. We tried to rationalize our predicament with inventive theologies and cosmologies. We rewrote history until it matched our ideals and concealed our often ugly motivations. Our true history became myth, and our myths became our substitute for history. That part of history and prehistory which lay beyond our feeble memories was filled in for us by entities who professed to belong to the Watchers. An oral history was passed on to the men who consorted with the Watchers, and we accepted much of it without question. After the great libraries of China and Egypt were destroyed, our prophets filled in the lost chapters of human progress. Yeah, I'll leave it at that because that's a pretty lengthy one, but I thought that was sick in relation to like if we are really talking about this concept of there being some battle that mankind is stuck in between. I love Disneyland of the Gods. It's one of the best books ever, and it's very short too. It's a book you could keep in your backpack, and it's just like so insanely filled with shit.
It's interesting too when you tie it in with what Elizondo said. I think he was talking about like, humanity rose to the top of the food chain 70,000 years ago. And he made an emphasis on, dogs came with us. Like we brought them up to the top of the food chain because they helped us out. They benefited from our rise as well. And that's another maybe similarity because I wrote a article and included this in it, I think a year ago now, but there is a theory that humans are what is known as self-domesticated. When you domesticate an animal, they basically stick around because they can live off of, the human, just general way of life, I guess. Part of that is they have less intimidating features, I guess. If you say you look at a wolf and it's kind of scary compared to like your fucking corgi, it's so they evolve in a way that's less threatening to people who are domesticating them. Essentially, they have rounder faces, that kind of thing. So there's a theory that humans, quote unquote, self-domesticated. And so my fucking brain always obviously go to like, we were domesticated like dogs kind of thing. Like, why would we self-domesticate? That doesn't like, I feel like you'd need someone above us in order to be domesticated.
The way I've always understood it is that dogs are a great example of, I think Carl Sagan gave a great example of this on his show Cosmos, but he's talking about dogs and natural selection. And he's talking about how dogs are an example of artificial selection. We make the selection.
Yeah.
We take the traits that are desirable with our dogs, like cuteness or loyalty, or if they're like literally, bro, the best dogs are the cutest, most loving wolves. All dogs. Also, side note, apparently all dogs come from prehistoric wolves. They used to think that some dogs came from ancient foxes and other dogs came from ancient wolves, but apparently it turns out that they all share a common ancestor that was a prehistoric wolf, I believe. Yeah, we choose the traits that dogs are going to have. So that's an example of artificial selection. We control it. I wonder if that would be more alluding to like humans are artificially selecting each other when we're choosing our mates. You know what I mean? Like when we look for mates as human beings, it is very unlike other animals. Like we look for all sorts of different criteria, but maybe not. I think I'm overthinking that.
And one of the other interesting parts of this was about learning mathematics or language or science. We hear these voices in our head, we get these ideas, an epiphany, but they've been teaching us this. So essentially he's talking about downloads or whatever you want to call them, inserted ideas into our heads. I think actually in American Cosmic, they really went into this by Diana Pasulka. They've kind of made it seem as if it came from some sort of other intelligence, at least, within Diana Pasulka's book. It's what it made it sound like. I don't know if you remember that part.
Yeah, she calls Nolan James, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And she uses a pseudonym. And then like later on, I think that was like a pretty cool thing she did, or either that or she like wasn't allowed to say it at some point.
Were you around on Twitter when that happened? That was really funny.
I think so.
Yeah, it was what happened. I think Diana kind of alluded to it in an interview that it was Gary. And so I tweeted something about it. It was something like Diana Pasulka actually basically just admitted that Gary Nolan was James. And then Gary replied to me with a picture of him and Katy Perry at that party that Diana talked about in her book. I was like, holy shit, dude, that's fucking nuts. Yeah, it was pretty cool. Yeah, I thought that was interesting that, these kind of downloads people talk about. I guess Tom is suggesting they might come from some other more advanced intelligence.
Well, shit, good luck proving it. That's all I think in my head. Like, that sounds cool and dope as a sci-fi fan.
They just start another religion, basically.
But yeah, that's exactly, bro. It's like, it seems like that we can't rationally understand this phenomenon. It seems like human beings want to like start some group or like try to, I don't know, man. It's a very interesting idea, is when people start telling you confidently that they know what UFOs are. It always makes me nervous as hell, because it's like the track record about human beings is that we have a history of getting shit dead wrong, like on a regular basis. So I like that now. It seems like there is a different feeling in the air. It feels like now we have legitimate scientists like Gary Nolan coming out and saying confidently, like, come see my data.
Tom said in one of his interviews, I was kind of researching and then I stumbled upon the poltergeist part. he essentially says kind of what he is talking about in the movie, but it was in that interview he did with Steve-O where he said, a bunch of wild, I think, important stuff. I'll just read it real quick. The quote I put in the article. For example, at UCLA, they were studying poltergeist events, and they found out that if you see a book move on the shelf and it scares the shit out of you, that book will then fly off the shelf and try to hit you. So the more scared you get, the more shit starts happening, and they didn't know why. Well, the reason is you're a transducer of your environment. You're an antenna plugging into all these frequencies. And once you go, oh, that book is moving, it'll move. Our universe is just not what we think it is. The whole thing with UFOs is that they're fucking around with us because of that. I would not think of a UFO as a vehicle which aliens are going to travel in. These are more like entities. So I found that to be really interesting. And the fact that he kind of tied in the transducer aspect with the poltergeist phenomenon and our kind of intent and its reaction to our intent and how we kind of manifest that in itself kind of really got me thinking about it. So I went and I researched these UCLA studies that Tom referenced in this interview. And it turns out that like at around the same time as Stanford Research Institute was doing their remote viewing studies with Pudov and Targ, UCLA also had a parapsychology lab. One of the guys who was part of that, his name was Dr. Barry Taff. And so I kind of was looking into some of the stuff he was talking about and some of the stuff he's written about. So yeah, one of the 4,000 cases he looked into was the Doris Bither case. I don't know if you ever heard of that. It's also known as the entity haunting, and they actually made a movie out of it, and it was like one of Martin Scorsese's like top 10 like scary movies of all time.
No, I haven't.
Yeah, I'm not really going to get into this one because it's fucking gnarly and like, yeah, there's really, really dark shit that happened in this one. But yeah, but either way, he was he researched that case when it happened. He was part of that team. So his idea is there are what he calls poltergeist agents. If they go into these, anomalous geomagnetic areas of the planet, basically, their resonation, I guess, with whatever frequencies are happening around them, and their inability to cope with the stress of that triggers something where their biofield starts emanating certain frequencies and basically causes all this crazy shit to happen. When that happens, I guess everyone else's kind of biomagnetic field feeds into that, and I think that's what Tom's kind of talking about with the whole transducer thing, is where your intent creates what happens within that dynamic.
So having said all that you just said, and knowing what we've heard about, like John Alexander said, how he thinks that this all has to do with consciousness, right? A lot of these things that people are reporting seeing. How much do you think that believing that these things are the way that they are play into them happening and our brains allowing them to happen? If that makes sense.
It makes complete sense. We might be on these lines of probabilities, and I think this is kind of where quantum physics comes into it, is that, everything's a probability, and our intent can act upon those probabilities and push it one way or another. It doesn't mean it's going to happen specifically the way we imagine it, but the probability of it happening is much higher the harder we try to concentrate in that direction. And I was also reading this guy, Tom Bearden. He's pretty out there. He's a lieutenant colonel who wrote a bunch of stuff on, he's one of those quote unquote free energy guys that kind of have a hard time with, but so there's mental phenomena and physical phenomena. So say there's three people. This is kind of a thought experiment he put out there. There's three people, and one of them is you. And say you're like super sick and you have an infection and it's making you hallucinate. And you have a piece of chalk in your hand, right? And you see the piece of chalk, you can feel it, see it, whatever, taste it. All your senses can take in this whatever piece of chalk. And two other people walk in, they don't see it, they have no sensory input. to that piece of chalk. So that is a mental phenomenon. That is, a mental thing in your own head. But say the same thing is happening and everyone in the room is, mentally okay. There's no hallucinations at all. But say not everyone can see or touch or taste the chalk, but more than one person can. So he calls that's the paranormal phenomena, where there's multiple minds, but not all minds can see or sense this information.
You explained that really well. I think when we play that back, you're going to be pretty impressed.
Okay, because I thought it sounded insane.
I thought that sounded fucking clutch, bro. That was good. Yeah, dude. I think, fuck, bro, you're really serving me right now because I don't even know how to respond to these points. Because I don't know much about ghosts. I've never done a Ouija board or done a seance or some shit like that. And I'm not judging people who do. I'm just saying that based on what I've read about it and listened to people who have done them, they swear up and down that shit happens. They swear that they see lights. They swear that tables shake. They swear that you had to be there. It was something else. And me as the super rational dude is I'm all right, well, just show me the evidence and then we'll get on with our day. Show me the video of the table shaking. But the thing is there's people who have done it and filmed it. And one of them was those people, I think they were in England, and it was called the Skull Experiment in the 90s. And they filmed all that shit. And they claim that Jeffrey Mishlove is a big advocate of the Skull Experiment. And that's the way I heard about it, was through his show, Thinking Aloud, as he was explaining how these scientists were thoroughly thought that they were communicating with the dead or some other energy field that they were tapping into somehow. And it wasn't ironclad and they were kind of goofy. But it was what it was. And it was an interesting experiment. I hope that if it did yield any interesting results that could be repeatable, I hope people start doing them. Not me, I'm not doing it. But I hope that if you get what I'm saying, dude, I hope that people start understanding these phenomena more so they're not paranormal. I think that shit happens with human beings when they get together, when they're alone or scared or whatever. I think that our consciousness has to behave in strange ways that we don't fully grasp yet. And like Edgar Mitchell said, he was people call it the sixth sense, but in reality, it should be the first sense, because we've always had this, and it's something that we're essentially losing as a species.
That's where I'm kind of headed with this idea, is that it's not necessarily dead people with motives trying to fuck with you. It would make more sense to me that it's some sort of energy that we don't understand, that's actually connected to us. I guess they call it a biofield. It's some sort of, and it's true. We do give off, we do give off these waves of energy, and I just don't think we understand. I think it's a kind of energy that we do not understand yet. It can be manipulated by electromagnetic energy and vice versa. And I think once we understand the connection between that biofield, quote unquote, and its relationship with electromagnetic energy, I think that might be the kind of connection we get. And that's kind of what comes to mind when people talk about, hey, you fly this craft with consciousness. It's what the fuck does that mean? But it's if you think about it, in a way where your kind of biofield connects electromagnetically to these craft, or there's some sort of conversion or transfer mechanism, that would make sense. And it's been talked about forever. It's the ether. It's all this shit. And I think that might be the missing link between all this stuff. And when people say, what does consciousness have to do with UFOs? I think it's a kind of energy we don't understand yet, and maybe used to understand better, and we're able to use in a very organic way. But we kind of lost that as technology started to take that over for us. I'm not saying that that's what I believe. I'm saying that would make the most sense to me when it comes to, consciousness having to do with any sort of technology.
Yeah, I like the way you put that. We're trying to talk about this as scientifically as we can. I know people probably chuckle when I say that, but like it is very difficult to talk about these concepts in a way that we can actually really try to like crack down on, right? And when we're talking about this type of like consciousness and how does this relate to UFOs is like that was one thing that John Keel kept coming back to was he was like they're not saucers, they're lights, god damn it. They're living lights. They seem to have an intelligence of their own, and people encounter these lights in all sorts of different circumstances, but a lot of the time they're alone, or they like get information transmitted to them, or they have all sorts of different like physiological effects. Like they'll have conjunctivitis symptoms. It'll feel like sand is in their eyes, or they'll have light microwave like burns on their skin. And these people have been observed by people like Keel and Jacques Vallée, and I'm sure Gary Nolan has stumbled onto a couple of them. And the thing is like when I hate to paint with a broad brush, and I am not an experiencer, so I hate to speak for them. But a large trend that I've noticed is that people will say like that when they see a craft, they thought that craft was alive. Mm-hmm. And they'll say like Uri Geller, for instance, when he said he has this whole story where he says Werner von Braun handed him a piece of a shard of something, and he held it in his hand, and he said, "What do you think, Uri?" And he said that I feel like this is something from not. He said he felt like it was alive. It felt like it was something from not this planet, and that's what I think of when I think of like it used consciousness. Was that just right there? Is it? You can tell that like from the second we come into contact with this sort of material or whatever these things are made out of or tapping into, that it works. It's almost like an extension of your senses. Yeah. Like that's when we're talking about technology and how we defined technology is like, I think an extension of our senses is a great subcategory of what technology is, because that is what radars are. That's what hearing aids are. You know what I mean? That's what night vision, all of these things are technologies that extend our capabilities as human beings, because our sensors are only capable of like comprehending so much for our brain.
Like imagine if we discovered some sort of energy that we had no idea about, and then all of a sudden all this shit is explained. Like you can make technologies that do all that, but it's like way more native to our own sensory inputs, like night vision goggles are pretty fucking clunky, right. Like that. This might be just a much more streamlined way to interface with it. That's kind of, it has been what's making sense to me, is that there's something we're missing here. We used to not be missing it, but for some reason, I don't know, our trajectory took us on a path that, brought us further away from it or something like that. I don't know. I'm just fucking spitballing. I'm not saying I believe this shit. It's just my research recently has kind of led to that.
Can I read you this quote from John Alexander from an interview he gave? Okay, so this is when he was talking to Jeffrey Mishlove. This was in 2019. And Mishlove asked him, he said, "You suggest, for example, that UFOs are not unrelated to near-death experience." And Alexander replied, "Well, I think consciousness is the key factor, and it crosses many things from psychokinesis. We've done lots of work with shamans around the world. We've had experiences that, hence the name of the book, Things That Can't Happen, but we've seen happen firsthand. I point out that if you're dealing with the spirit world and questioning UFOs, are these real? Is it ET? I come down against the extraterrestrial hypothesis just because it's too simple. But we have had humans interacting with sentient non-humans throughout the entirety of human history in all cultures, and that they happen to fly in little metal vessels is a relatively new wrinkle to that, even though UFOs have been around for a long time." And Mishlove says, "Sure. I mean, they used to call them chariots." And Alexander goes, well, this goes on back literally centuries and millennia. You also have, as you know, other kinds of spirits from fairies and elves, and every culture has them. And Mishlev says, an entire super sensible universe. And Alexander says, yep. And so the question is, if these things are interrelated, how does that work? And as I say, there does appear to be a piece of human consciousness that's sort of the cross-cutting. And that's like the common factor, as we said in that presentation. That's the common factor, apparently, between all these phenomena, is like they're intrinsically linked to human consciousness. It seems like.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Probably. Definitely.
Maybe. Perhaps.
Yeah, it's tricky. Oh, another thing that he was talking about was fucking holograms.
Dude, if we do talk about holograms, I have to talk about that dude Ishtak Bentov, because he wrote a book. I might need 5 minutes, because he wrote a book called Stalking the Wild Pendulum, and in it he talks about like what is a hologram. That book is a great thought experiment for consciousness.
When it comes to holograms, like one of the themes in Monsters of California was like Bigfoot, I guess, was kind of a hologram when they experienced them. The guy referred to it as UFO technology was creating this hologram. And that's something Tom has said in the past, is that holograms were projected to start religions, basically. Yeah, Lavenda in I think it was Secret Machines Man, talks about how certain people who are missing limbs or are actually like born without limbs still feel that they have those limbs, because that is kind of their baseline projection of themselves into the universe. Like a human is meant to experience life in a certain way, and the fact that people who were born without limbs still have the phantom limb phenomenon. They still feel like they have a limb there, even though they never did, even from birth. That's might be proof of our brains kind of projecting out into the universe, what we expect to see.
God, Peter Levenda is the man.
I know.
He is such a great author.
It is kind of crazy.
So there's this part from Stalking the Wild Pendulum by Ishtak Bentov, and he's talking about a concept he called coherency, and he's explaining what holograms are in relation to like us as creatures and like different dimensions. So this is a good paragraph, I think. He says, first, coherency is important because we have to show that the information forms interference patterns in space-time or protospace as it expands. You may remember from our description of the hologram in Chapter 1 what an interference pattern is. We know that holograms can be made only with coherent light, and we know that holograms or interference patterns contain in each element of their surface or volume all the information about the whole system, just as the chromosomes in each cell of our body contain the information about how to build another copy of our bodies. We know, of course, that in practice, it is the sperm and the egg cells that specialize in the business of making copies of us as human beings. But in principle, all cells contain all the information about us. So as we, the observers, rapidly expand in the space-like dimension, we form interference patterns with other observers as they too expand, and our information interacts with the information from these other observers. This all happens against the background of the reference frequency or the absolute. To go back to the hologram, our observers are the working beam, while the absolute is the reference, the inexperienced, naive beam.
That makes a lot of sense.
That was dope, dude. He's the man.
Yeah,
that was a great book.
And that's something Bearden talks about with the many worlds interpretation of quantum mechanics, is that a lot of quantum mechanics is based on one single observer, when reality is there's a shitload of observers, and it's really interesting to think about it that way.
Do you think that our planet would exist if humans weren't there to observe it? or if anybody wasn't there. Do you get what I'm asking?
That's the question.
I wonder if everything would just fizzle away.
The tree falls in the forest type thing.
Yeah, that's perfect metaphor.
Well, we could talk about the scene where Bigfoot pisses in the guy's mouth if you want.
What? That's in this movie?
Yeah, and apparently it was a hologram. So it was a hologram piss.
Nice, dude. I knew Tom DeLonge would have his own directorial touch.
Yeah, dude. Yeah,
why is Bigfoot pissing in someone's mouth?
It's just, had to happen. It's part of the deal.
It'll make sense a few generations from now.
Yeah. Holographic piss.
All right. Well, have a good night, everybody.
Yeah. Yeah. Did you want to talk about anything else? I think that's pretty good for now.
Honestly, dude, that was a lot of fun. I think that was good. And unless if you're good, I'm good. I don't really have anything.
When's your article coming out?
Oh, Jesus, dude. Dude, you can't keep doing this to me. I'm gonna die. I'm trying my best, bro. But
I know it's not easy.
I'm a ruthless procrastinator when it comes to writing these things.
Oh, it's brutal. I know.
But it's still something that I'm trying to learn about, because I think it was one of the first episodes we talked about this, and I was still writing it. Like, I was just getting it started, and I was like, yeah, it's about this. It's that's folded into this. But I like to take, I don't know if anyone's read any of my Substacks, but I like to take fiction and just throw it in there. And just, even if it's a blurb from The Wizard of Oz, I like people to be able to read concepts from our favorite stories and be able to think about these concepts and be like, oh, okay, this is something that, like, this is fun. This is a lot of fun. You know what I mean? And that's something I've been trying to do with this book. But goddamn, dude, anytime you try to tie anything into I don't want to dive too deep into it, but anytime you fucking scratch either the name Hermes or Enoch, in the alien world, that shit's Pandora's box, bro. It's like fucking never ending. Just like, so I'm trying to write it my way and make it to where it's something that's like, it's not going to be a fucking Pulitzer Prize, but it's still something that I think, like, I've thought a lot about, because the ideas that, or the challenge that the UFO phenomena presents us in the 21st century, I think deserves a good look in terms of, like, how are we going to respond as a culture to Fatima event in anywhere, you name it, LA, freaking Iran. How do we respond to an event like that? And the sociologically, like, how do our institutions respond if they see a UFO or a saucer, or if a little green man hops out on the White House lawn? Like, what I think that these types of ideas are kind of freaky to people, but, like, I also want people to not be afraid. I'm so tired of people being afraid of our world. This is our world. You know what I mean? Like, how are we going to live our lives in fear over these topics? And I know people don't like really talking about ghosts or death, and that type of stuff is heavy and uncomfortable. But, like, I am just coming at this from an honest, like, let's give this a try collectively and see if we can really figure out what this is. And maybe if we do, we learn a lot about ourselves in the meantime, you know? And, like, that seems to be everything. Every indication is pointing that direction. You know, it seems like the more we're learning about UFOs, the more we're learning about human beings. So I'm on board, bro.
I never remember what my shit is. Like, it is called A Resonant Chaos on tinyklaus.com. It's for supporters, and it'll be free next week at some point. So, depending on when you hear this, go check it out. And I think we're good, man.
Sweet.
Yeah. So thanks for listening, and we'll see you again next week. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.